When the last light of October fades, the world feels different. The air grows slower, the nights longer, and even the wind seems to whisper in older tones. This is the season between seasons, a quiet threshold where time itself seems to pause. Tonight, we travel through that doorway. Halloween was not born in shadows or fear. It was born in firelight, in harvest smoke, in the human need to remember what passes and to honor what remains. Long before carved pumpkins and glowing windows, people stood beneath the dim sky and lit bonfires to guide the spirits home. This story is not about monsters, but about memory. Not about horror, but about the delicate line between the living and the lost. Tonight, we will walk that line together through ancient fields, Roman roads, church bells, and quiet streets filled with candlelight. Let the rain fall softly outside. Let the past breathe again, slowly, as we cross into the night between worlds. Long before the word Halloween existed, long before churches or cities or printed calendars, people watched the sky. The Celts measured life not by numbers but by rhythm, by the rise of the sun, the ripening of fields, the smell of cold rain. To them, the year was a breathing circle of light and shadow. Summer belonged to growth, warmth, and movement. Winter belonged to silence, rest, and renewal. The balance between the two was the pulse of existence itself. At the heart of that rhythm stood one night unlike any other. It was the end of harvest, when the fields lay empty and the animals were brought close to the hearth. The air grew sharp, the daylight thin. This turning point was called Samhain, the last harvest, the night between years. When people spoke its name, they did so softly, as if not to disturb something sacred in the dark. Samhain was not simply a festival, it was a threshold, a pause in time when the world seemed to hold its breath. The Celts believed that on this single night, the veil between the living and the dead grew thin enough for memory to cross. The spirits of ancestors could walk among their kin once more, drawn by warmth and the scent of burning wood. Families left offerings of bread and milk on their doorsteps, lit small lamps in hollowed gourds or turnips, and gathered near great communal fires. Fear was not part of these rituals. Instead, there was quiet awe, a recognition that life and death were never truly separate. Every spark that rose into the air carried a prayer for protection and gratitude. To extinguish all household fires and relight them from a single sacred flame was to renew the bond between people and the world that sustained them. The new fire was shared from house to house, symbolizing unity and continuity, as though every home were a fragment of one larger heart. The Druids, keepers of time and ritual, marked Samhain by studying the moon and the stars. They did not count days on paper but felt them through the body of the earth, in frost, in silence, in the way animals grew restless before the cold. Their year began not in spring but in this descent into darkness, for they saw death as the first act of rebirth. To rest was to prepare for new life. Around the great fires, people told stories of heroes and gods, of love and loss and the endless return of light. Children listened while elders reminded them that nothing truly ends. Everything only changes shape. The sound of drums echoed through the hills like a second heartbeat. Dogs barked, horses stirred, and the night carried the mixed scent of smoke and soil. When the fires finally sank to embers, the villages fell silent. In that stillness, the people felt both small and infinite, a part of the great circle that turned without beginning or end. They believed that if they lived in rhythm with that circle, they would remain protected through the dark season. The ancient Celtic calendar that guided them was not written, it was lived. Every sunrise confirmed its truth, every season renewed its promise, and though centuries of conquest, Conversion and change would later scatter their traditions. The pattern endured beneath everything that came after. Even now, when autumn deepens and the light grows gold, something ancient stirs inside us. We sense the closing of one chapter and the quiet birth of another. We light candles, gather close, and watch the shadows dance, unaware that we are echoing the same gestures made by people thousands of years ago. The circle of time still turns, the bright half yields to the dark, and the dark, in its patience, prepares to give birth again to the light. To the Celts, that truth was the calendar. It required no clock, no script, only the steady courage to trust that endings are never final. Every October wind, every fading field, still carries their whisper. The year begins in darkness, because light is born from it. Samhain was more than a marker on a calendar. For the ancient Celts, it was the doorway through which one year stepped into the next. They believed time did not end and begin cleanly, but rather overlapped, one breath fading into another. Samhain was that shared breath, the fragile space between. The living gathered to honor the dying light, while the spirits of the dead were said to return for one gentle night before winter sealed the world again. In every village, the fires that had burned through summer were allowed to die. People watched the smoke thin into the sky, a symbol that one life had finished its course. Then, under the first deep darkness of November, a single sacred flame was lit by the Druids. From that central fire, torches carried the new year to every hearth. When each household rekindled its fire, the circle of life began again. No sermon, no decree, only the quiet knowledge that warmth had returned. The Celts saw death not as an enemy, but as a companion. Crops withered, animals were slaughtered for food, and yet everything that ended nourished what would rise again. To live in harmony with that rhythm was wisdom. To deny it was blindness. So when they spoke of the dead crossing the veil on Samhain night, it was not a horror story, it was a reunion. Tables were set with extra places, candles were left in windows, and doors remained unbarred so that ancestors could enter freely. Those who had lost loved ones in the past year whispered their names into the wind. The act was not mourning but invitation, a recognition that love outlived the body. People believed that the dead might walk unseen among them, brushing through the fields, resting by the fires, listening to familiar voices. The chill that sometimes stirred the air was not fear but awareness. Something eternal moved close. Communities gathered on hilltops where stone circles still stood from older ages. Offerings of grain, milk, and honey were placed at the edge of the flames for the unseen guests. Music was played, slow and steady, the beat of drums echoing the heartbeat of the earth itself. Between the songs came long silences in which everyone could almost feel the boundary thin, the edge of the world breathing with them. Some accounts tell that people wore simple disguises of ash and fur, not to hide from the dead but to blend with them. They wished to move gently among spirits without disturbing them, to share the same space without fear. The disguise was respect, not protection. In that moment of shared existence, no one was entirely alive or entirely gone. All were part of the same continuous story. At midnight, the Druids performed quiet blessings over the gathered families. They threw carved sticks or marked stones into the fire to divine what the coming year might bring. Yet even prophecy was approached calmly. Whatever was revealed, good harvest or harsh winter, was accepted as part of the same sacred balance. To live, to die, to return, to begin again. These were simply the seasons of the soul. As the night deepened, the fires sank to embers. Villagers returned home carrying small coals wrapped in cloth, careful not to let them fade. In each home, that ember was placed upon the hearth and coaxed back to flame. The new light filled the dark rooms, golden and patient. Children were told that this was the soul of the year reborn, proof that warmth would outlast the cold. In the morning, frost covered the ground. The festival was over, but its meaning lingered. Every breath in the cold air felt connected to all who had breathed before. The new year had begun not with noise but with silence, not with triumph but with continuity. When we stand today beneath October skies, feeling the wind turn colder, we are closer to those people than we imagine. The instinct to light a candle, to remember, to honor what has passed, it is older than any religion, older than any written word. It is the quiet certainty that memory itself is sacred. To the Celts, Samhain was never the night of death. It was the night that proved death could not end anything. It was the promise that light, though faint, would always return. When darkness fell across the Celtic lands during Samhain, the fire became more than light. It was memory, protection, and promise. For a people who lived by the turning of seasons, fire was the living heart of the world. It burned in the hearth. It cooked the harvest. It guarded against winter's shadow. On Samhain night, when the old year ended and the new one waited to be born, every fire in every home was allowed to die. Villages dimmed to silence, the air filled with the scent of cold ash. That silence was not emptiness but reverence. The people waited for the sacred flame that would carry them forward. From hilltops and sacred clearings, the Druids kindled the new fire. They used friction or focused sunlight, a ritual spark born from the world itself, untouched by human flame. When it caught, it was said that time itself began again. The glow spread outward as torches were lit and carried through the night to every dwelling. Villagers held their breath as the light approached, a soft flicker in the distance, growing brighter, spreading from home to home until the whole valley glowed like a constellation on earth. This was the true meaning of the bonfire. The word itself comes from bone fire, for sometimes animal bones were cast into the flames as offerings, yet it was never an act of destruction. It was gratitude. The bones represented life given to sustain life, the animals that had fed the tribe through the year, the ancestors whose strength endured through memory. By returning those bones to the fire, the people symbolically returned them to the cycle of creation. Around the great bonfires, food was shared in abundance. Every household contributed something from its store: bread, grain, fruit, cured meat, milk, honey. No one was left out, for to eat together under the New Year's fire was to renew the bond of the community. Children were given small pieces of bread shaped into circles or knots, symbols of continuity. Elders poured a portion of cider or mead onto the earth before taking the first drink, offering thanks to the unseen roots that made everything grow. The smoke carried prayers upward. The fire's warmth reminded them that even as winter descended, the heart of the earth still burned quietly beneath. Sparks rose into the night like wandering souls, tiny stars that mirrored the heavens above. Some said the dead followed those sparks, finding their way through the darkness toward the light of home. Families left portions of their meal on the doorstep, not waste, but invitation. Bread for the hungry spirits, milk for the weary travelers between worlds. For the Celts, to feed the dead was to feed the living. Generosity kept balance. A house that forgot to offer hospitality risked spiritual coldness in the months ahead, but one that remembered would be blessed with peace and steady fire. The feast was therefore both celebration and covenant, a promise to honor the old while welcoming the new. Stories say that around these fires people told tales of heroes and ghosts, but even those stories ended gently. A hero might die but return in song. A spirit might wander but find rest by dawn. Nothing was final. The rhythm of the tale, like the rhythm of the flame, always circled back to life. When the feasting was done, Embers were gathered and taken home in clay pots. Each family rekindled its hearth from that communal source, just as each person was considered a spark from a greater fire. The new flame connected every home to every other, an invisible web of warmth stretching across miles of dark countryside. Even those who lived far apart felt joined by its light. The fire also served a more practical purpose. Its smoke was thought to cleanse the land and keep away sickness. People led their cattle between two smaller fires to bless them before the long winter. The air filled with the low sounds of herds moving slowly through the haze, the hiss of sparks rising, the soft murmur of prayers carried by the wind. For a moment the line between sacred and ordinary life disappeared. The ritual was life itself, performed not out of superstition but out of recognition. Everything depended on balance, and balance required remembrance. As the night wore on, some villagers stayed awake until dawn, tending the flames. They spoke quietly of those who had died that year, of children born, of harvests lost or saved. The fire became witness to their gratitude and grief alike. In its glow, faces looked ancient, carved by light and shadow, living ancestors in their own right. When morning came, the fire still burned low, steady and patient. People greeted the pale sun not with fear of the coming cold, but with trust. The world had turned again. The dark half of the year had begun, but they carried its light within them. Even when snow buried the fields, they would remember the warmth of this night, the scent of wood smoke, the taste of shared bread. The stones of ancient Europe still hold the memory of fire. Across Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and parts of northern France, circles of standing stones remain silent, patient witnesses to the old ways. They rise from the grass like frozen echoes, each one placed by hands that lived and died long before history had a name. During Samhain, these stones were not seen as monuments but as living participants. The Celts believed that stone could remember, that it could absorb the warmth of flame and the whispers of those who gathered around it. Every ritual fire left a mark upon the world, not only in the soil but in the quiet endurance of rock. When Christianity spread through these lands centuries later, many of the stone circles were left standing. The new faith could not erase them, because people still felt their presence. Villagers continued to bring offerings at harvest time, lighting small fires near the ancient stones and speaking old words that had lost their meaning but not their power. The rituals softened over time, becoming stories, tales told to children about wandering lights, returning ancestors, and spirits that walked between dusk and dawn. In this way, memory became legend. The bonfires of Samhain transformed into hearth tales of ghostly visitors. The offerings of bread and milk became customs of hospitality, then faded into superstition. Yet beneath those layers of story, the same truth endured. People still felt that the night of Samhain was different, thinner, touched by something beyond themselves. Stone circles were built in harmony with the stars. On certain nights, the rising moon would pass directly between two stones, casting a pale line of light along the ground. The Druids may have used these alignments to mark the passage of time, but villagers saw them as proof that the heavens and the earth were speaking to each other. When the moonlight crossed the fire's glow, it created a third, unseen path, the meeting place of living and spirit. The stories that survived call this moment the thinning of the veil. The earliest Christian monks who recorded Celtic customs described Samhain with both fascination and concern. They wrote of people leaving food outside for the wandering dead, of strange lights moving across fields, of figures seen near burial mounds. To the monks, these were spirits in need of prayer. To the villagers, they were family returning for a visit. The same experience carried two meanings, depending on how one looked at the world. Over generations, the stories changed shape. As memory dimmed, imagination filled the gaps. What had once been ancestors became restless ghosts. What had been offerings became protections. Fires that once welcomed were said to ward away. The line between reverence and fear blurred, and in that blur, folklore was born. By the Middle Ages, travellers across Britain spoke of the soul's night, when the dead could walk the roads. Some described seeing distant lanterns or hearing faint footsteps in the dark. In truth, these were likely echoes of the old processions that carried torches from the sacred fires, the flicker of remembrance mistaken for haunting. But the effect was the same, a quiet awareness that the living were never truly alone. The stones outlasted the stories told about them. Even now, in the ruins of old Europe, you can find circles half buried in moss, still aligned with the October moon. Locals sometimes call them fairy rings, or the places of the old fire. On cold nights, animals rest beside them for shelter, and when mist gathers, they seem to breathe. In later centuries, the church replaced Samhain with All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. Yet the feeling of the night between worlds remained. People continued to light candles for the dead, to visit graves, to tell stories by firelight. They no longer called it Samhain, but the stones remembered. They stood in fields that had known both pagan fire and Christian prayer, both life and ruin, and still they watched the sky. Modern archaeologists can measure their age, trace their alignment, analyze their purpose, but no science can capture what those stones once meant to the people who built them. To stand among them even now, as wind moves through the grass, is to feel something wordless, a rhythm, a pulse, a lingering warmth. You might not see the fire, but you can sense its ghost. Every autumn, as the light fades and the first frost creeps across the fields, that ghost stirs again. We may call it imagination, nostalgia, or the poetry of place, but perhaps it is the old fire, still burning softly somewhere beyond sight. The stories of wandering spirits and haunted fields may sound like superstition, yet they carry a deeper longing to believe that connection never ends, that those who came before still walk beside us in ways we cannot measure. When the legions of Rome marched into the mist-covered lands of the Celts, they carried more than swords and armor. They brought a new rhythm of time, a calendar carved in marble, not sky. Festivals dictated by empire, not by season. The Celts, whose lives followed the quiet breathing of the earth, suddenly found their world marked by Roman dates and Roman gods. Yet beneath that new order, the old fires still burned. The Druids, guardians of the ancient rites, had always been the bridge between the visible and the invisible. They were not merely priests, they were astronomers, healers, philosophers, and judges. Their power came from knowledge, knowledge that did not need to be written because it was remembered through voice and ritual. To the Romans, such influence was dangerous. They saw the Druids not as wise men but as rivals. As Roman roads spread across the land, Druidic groves were cut down, and sacred hills were repurposed for temples of Jupiter and Mars. The Roman Senate even issued decrees against Druid practices, claiming they were subversive and barbaric. Yet for all their power, the conquerors could not erase what they did not understand. The Celtic people still gathered quietly when the harvest ended. They still lit fires in the hills. They still whispered the name of Samhain. The Romans, practical as always, chose adaptation over endless struggle. They began to weave local customs into their own festivals. One such celebration, Feralia, honored the spirits of the dead. During late February, families offered bread soaked in wine to their ancestors, believing it would ease their passage into the afterlife. When Roman settlers observed Samhain, They recognized something familiar, the same gesture of remembrance, though performed under a colder sky. The result was a slow blending of beliefs, Roman ceremony meeting Celtic intuition. By the 1st century of Roman rule, festivals like Lemuria, in which restless spirits were appeased with black beans and whispered prayers, overlapped with Celtic fire rituals. In some regions, Samhain fires were lit near Roman shrines, and offerings were made in both traditions. What had once been a sharp line between conqueror and conquered blurred into something new, a shared reverence for the cycle of life and death, light and shadow. Even Roman soldiers stationed in the far north wrote of strange autumn nights when locals sang songs in languages they could not understand, and the air felt thick with meaning. The empire had brought law, architecture, and Latin speech, but in the quiet of October, it was the older world that spoke louder. As centuries passed, a delicate exchange took place. The Celts adopted certain Roman symbols, coins, laurel wreaths, and public games, while the Romans absorbed fragments of Celtic philosophy, the belief that the soul endured beyond death, that nature itself was sacred, that every ending was a beginning in disguise. The Druid's voice, though diminished, found echoes in the chants of Roman priests. But the deepest shift came later, not through soldiers but through missionaries. As Christianity spread through the empire, it reached the northern lands already heavy with ancient memory. The early church, guided by both caution and strategy, learned what the Romans had learned before, that the heart of a people could not be conquered by force. It could only be converted through familiarity, and so the old festivals were given new names. The bonfires of Samhain were not forbidden, they were reinterpreted. The prayers for the dead became holy masses. The wandering spirits were recast as souls in need of redemption. The sacred night between worlds became a vigil of saints and martyrs. Gradually, Samhain was absorbed into a new order of faith, a transformation not of spirit, but of language. For many generations, the two systems coexisted. On the same night, one family might pray to saints, while another whispered to ancestors. Both lit candles, both left offerings, both felt the same wind moving through the dark. To the church, this blending was compromise. To the people, it was continuity. In this meeting between Rome and the Druids, something remarkable occurred. Two very different visions of time merged into one. The linear march of Roman order met the circular flow of Celtic tradition. Out of that union emerged the rhythm that would eventually shape the medieval year: holy days layered upon older days, feast upon feast, memory upon memory. The Druids faded into legend, their names lost to silence. Yet their teachings survived in the smallest gestures: the lighting of a candle, the reverence for seasons, the faith that death was not an end but a passage. When Rome met the Druids, neither side truly won. Instead, both became part of a larger story, one that would continue to evolve long after their temples and fires turned to dust. When Christianity spread through the Western world, it encountered not only new lands but deep-rooted traditions. The Church understood something the Empire had not: that belief could not simply replace what came before. It had to transform it. People needed continuity, not rupture. So, instead of destroying old festivals, the Church often baptized them, giving new meanings to ancient fires. The same instinct that once honored nature was redirected toward heaven, and in that transformation, the quiet night of Samhain began its slow rebirth into what would one day be called All Hallows' Eve. The shift began in the 7th century, when Pope Boniface IV consecrated the Roman pantheon, a temple once devoted to all gods, and rededicated it to all saints. It was a powerful symbol, the many faces of the divine, gathered now under one name. The festival of All Saints' Day was originally celebrated in May, aligning with spring, renewal, and sunlight. But as Christianity expanded northward, the church found that May meant little to those who feared the coming winter more than the return of flowers. By the 9th century, Pope Gregory III moved the feast to the 1st of November, the very time when Samhain had long been observed. It was a deliberate gesture of harmony, not hostility. The church offered people a way to keep their rituals while giving them a new direction. The bonfires became vigils for saints and martyrs. The offerings to ancestors became prayers for souls in purgatory. The night before the feast, October 31st, was called All Hallows' Eve, and in that name the word Halloween was quietly born. For many villagers, little changed. They still gathered by candlelight, still told stories, still believed that the veil between worlds was thin. But now, the spirits they spoke of were framed not as wandering ghosts, but as souls in need of prayer. Lighting a candle became an act of intercession rather than invitation. To remember the dead was now a Christian duty, not a pagan custom, yet the feeling was the same. It was still about connection, gratitude, and continuity. In the following centuries, All Souls' Day was added, expanding the remembrance to include not only saints but all departed souls. Across Europe, people visited graves, cleaned tombstones, and left offerings of food or flowers. Bells rang through the cold morning air to remind the living of those who had gone before them. Children were sometimes sent from house to house to collect small soul cakes, each received in exchange for a prayer for the dead. It was both charity and ritual, echoing the older Celtic practice of leaving food at the door for spirits. The boundary between the old and the new faith blurred further still. In Ireland and Scotland, villagers lit small torches to guide the souls home. In France, families left wine and bread on the table overnight, believing their ancestors might visit in peace. In England, churchyards glowed with hundreds of candles, each representing a life remembered. The night was solemn, but never grim. Death was not celebrated, it was acknowledged. It was given its place within the living world. By reframing Samhain into All Hallows' Eve and All Souls' Day, the church had done something profound. It had not erased the old belief that the dead walk among us. It had simply changed the language in which people spoke about it. The spirits became souls, the bonfires became blessings, and the thin veil between worlds became a bridge of prayer. For the faithful, this made perfect sense. For those who still clung to older ways, it was an acceptable compromise. In monasteries, monks spent the night of October 31st in prayer, chanting psalms that rose through the cold stone halls like low waves. Outside, villagers gathered in fields, watching the same stars their ancestors had watched during Samhain. Between the chanting and the silence, between the church and the field, humanity found a kind of balance, a shared awareness that life was brief but sacred. Some historians argue that this blending of pagan and Christian thought created a uniquely European spirituality, one that could hold both fear and faith, shadow and light. It taught people that even within death there could be beauty, and within sorrow, peace. The transformation of Samhain into All Hallows' Eve was not an act of conquest but of translation. It carried forward the same essential truth that memory is holy. Over time, the words changed further. Hallow meant holy, Ian meant evening. The phrase All Hallows Ian gradually softened into Halloween. Few who spoke it understood its lineage, yet the sound of it carried centuries of reverence. When villagers uttered it softly into the chill air, they were unknowingly speaking both languages at once, the old tongue of the Druids and the new tongue of the Church. To remember was once a sacred act. Long before history was written, people preserved memory through ritual, the turning of seasons, the lighting of fires, the telling of names aloud. When the Church inherited a world filled with such customs, it did not erase that instinct, it reshaped it. Where once villagers had called to their ancestors beneath the moon, they now whispered prayers to saints beneath stained glass and stone. But the essence was unchanged. The act of remembrance was still a bridge between the visible and the invisible, between the living and those who had passed beyond. In the early medieval world, death was never distant. Life was brief and uncertain, marked by famine, sickness, and war. Yet people carried within them a quiet acceptance that every ending belonged to a larger pattern. The Church gave form to that understanding. It taught that souls did not vanish, they journeyed onward, moving through light and shadow toward divine rest. Remembering them was not only a duty, it was a gesture of faith, a declaration that love could reach across death's silence. As the idea of All Saints and All Souls Days spread across Europe, remembrance became an annual rhythm. Bells rang through small villages, their slow tones carrying across the fields. Families gathered around the hearth, lighting candles for those they missed. In some regions, a single candle was placed on the windowsill for each soul departed from the household. At night, the flicker of 1,000 small flames made even the darkest streets seem alive with presence. Each candle held meaning. It was both a plea and a promise, a prayer for mercy, and a vow not to forget. The Church taught that prayer could shorten the time a soul spent in purgatory, easing its passage toward peace. Villagers believed their words and gestures could truly reach the unseen. The power of faith, after all, was that it gave action to love. Across Europe, different cultures wove their own colors into the tapestry of remembrance. In Poland, families visited graves at dusk, leaving wreaths of pine and small lanterns to burn through the night. In Italy, bread baked in the shape of bones, Pain Day Morti was shared among neighbors, a reminder that death nourishes life. In France, chrysanthemums became flowers of memory, blooming just as the season turned cold. Each custom carried the same quiet message: to remember is to remain connected. The stories of saints deepened this sense of connection. The Church's calendar filled with names of men and women who had lived with extraordinary faith. They became the new ancestors of the Christian world, examples of endurance, compassion, and courage. Their relics were placed in altars, their images painted on walls. Pilgrims traveled across continents to stand near their bones, seeking strength from proximity. These saints were not distant idols, but companions in the long journey of the soul. Through them, the people felt that heaven itself had a human face. Even as devotion turned toward saints, traces of the older world remained. Many of these holy figures inherited qualities once given to Celtic spirits or deities. A saint might protect travelers, another heal the sick, another bless the harvest. In this way, the Christian world became a continuation of the ancient one, its spirits renamed but not forgotten. The fire that once burned for ancestors now burned for saints, but the warmth was the same. The language of remembrance also evolved. The Latin word commemorare, to remember together, captured something essential. Memory was not solitary, it was communal, an act of gathering. Every mass, every hymn, every procession was a collective gesture of memory. The Church understood that faith depended not only on belief but on belonging, on the shared act of turning toward the past with gratitude. As centuries passed, the focus of remembrance expanded beyond saints and family. It began to include the unnamed and the forgotten, the poor, the lost, the souls with no one left to pray for them. The concept of a universal remembrance emerged, one night each year when no soul would be left unacknowledged. That, too, was an echo of Samhain, when every spirit, noble or humble, could walk the earth once more. On All Souls' Night, the world seemed to pause. The bells tolled slowly, the living spoke softly. Even animals moved quietly through the fields, as if sensing that the boundary between realms had thinned again. But unlike the fearsome ghosts of later tales, these souls were gentle. They were the memory of love made visible, the invisible kinship that tied each generation to the next. In that calm awareness, remembrance became more than nostalgia. It was transformation. The act of lighting a candle or offering a prayer changed the one who performed it. To remember was to participate in eternity, to affirm that life continues through care, through story, through faith. Faith does not always survive through noise. Sometimes it endures through silence, through gestures repeated so many times that their meaning becomes a kind of breathing. When the great transformations of religion swept across Europe, many old ways vanished from words but not from hands. A farmer might no longer call upon the spirits of the harvest, but he would still pause before cutting the first sheaf of grain. A mother might no longer whisper to the ancestors, but she would still light a candle at her window when the year turned cold. Ritual became memory disguised as habit, and through that habit, the soul of the past lived on. After Samhain became All Hallows, the world seemed to change on the surface, yet underneath it all, the same rhythm beat quietly. The church bells replaced the druid's drum, but both measured time in the same way, by marking the passage between light and darkness, life and rest. Every prayer, every flame, every procession was a continuation of something much older, preserved in new language. People who no longer remembered why they did these things still felt that they must. Tradition was not obedience, it was instinct. In many small villages across Ireland and Scotland, customs that predated Christianity continued under new names. When families baked soul cakes, they shaped them round like the sun, just as the Celts had done with their harvest loaves. When people placed candles in carved turnips or gourds, they believed they were lighting the path for lost souls, a quiet reflection of the old fire that had once guided ancestors home. The church might have called it remembrance, but the heart knew it was reunion. The strength of these rituals lay in their simplicity. They required no temple, no priest, no book, only presence. To stand in a field and feel the wind change, to sit by a fire and speak a name aloud, to place a small offering where the world meets the unknown. These were the ways ordinary people carried eternity in their hands. They may not have understood the theology behind their faith, but they understood time. They knew it moved in circles, and that every act of gratitude or care helped keep that circle unbroken. The Middle Ages were often harsh. Winters were long, sickness was common, and life was uncertain, but the rituals gave structure to that uncertainty. Each year had its appointed days of fasting, of feasting, of silence, and of song. People might not have controlled their fate, yet they could honor it. Lighting a candle, singing a hymn, or offering bread became ways to tell the universe, I am still here, and I still remember. It is easy to think of faith as belief in something unseen, but in those centuries, faith was also a rhythm of doing. The repetition itself carried meaning. Generations passed, languages shifted, empires rose and fell, and yet the gestures stayed the same. Even when the words around them changed, the movements endured a kind of human muscle memory for reverence. Many church rituals absorbed the cadence of older practices. The lighting of incense, the ringing of bells, the procession of torches through the dark all echoed the Celtic fire festivals. The priests may not have intended it, but the people felt it. The ceremonies of the church became the new language of the same longing, to bring light into darkness, to keep fear at bay, to remind themselves that the unseen world was not to be dreaded but respected. In the quiet hours after a mass, When the candles still glowed faintly and the incense hung in the air, the villagers would sometimes remain seated, listening to the echo fade. They did not speak, yet something passed among them, a sense that the dead were near, that memory was listening. Even when faith was no longer described as a circle but as a ladder toward heaven, the feeling beneath it remained circular, the living praying for the dead, and the dead, in turn, inspiring the living. This continuity was not defiance. It was survival. The church, for all its power, did not truly replace what came before. It gave it shelter. The rituals of remembrance, rebirth, and renewal simply changed attire. The sacred fires moved indoors, becoming candles. The songs of the fields became hymns. The offerings at the threshold became prayers at the altar. The world learned to whisper where it once had sung, but the melody was the same. Even centuries later, when Halloween evolved into something playful, when children dressed as spirits and went door to door, the structure of the old world was still there. To move from house to house, to exchange gifts of food, to light the night with laughter, it was the echo of that same ancient impulse to share the harvest and invite warmth against the dark. Every tradition carries a heartbeat, and sometimes that heartbeat must cross an ocean to survive. When millions left Ireland and Scotland in the 19th century, they carried little more than memories. Among the songs and prayers packed deep in their minds was one night that never vanished, the night when the veil thinned, when candles burned for the dead and stories filled the darkness. Halloween, though not yet called by that name everywhere, was one of the few rituals that belonged entirely to the people, and so it sailed west with them, across cold, grey seas, toward a new world. The journey itself was an act of faith. Families left behind everything familiar: fields, stone walls, old churchyards where generations slept. Many never saw their homeland again. Yet when autumn came to the American coast, and the air carried the same chill as October in Ireland, they felt something stir. The rhythm of harvest, of light fading into darkness, was unchanged. They built fires again, not on sacred hills but in open yards. They told stories of spirits and saints, of home and loss. The rituals that had survived centuries of conquest now survived exile. For the Irish immigrants, remembrance was survival. The great famine had hollowed their land and their hearts. So many had died that every family carried ghosts. Lighting candles for the dead was not just tradition, it was necessity. In crowded tenements of Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, they placed small lights in windows on All Hallows' Eve, believing the souls of the departed might still find their way across the water. The flicker of those flames was both mourning and hope. In these new cities, the customs began to change shape. There were no open fields for bonfires, no druid stones on which to set offerings. Instead, families gathered inside, where warmth was scarce but stories were plentiful. Children listened as their grandparents spoke of banshees and fairy mounds, of the puka that stole travellers in the mist, and of the kind spirits who came home to bless the hearth. These tales were not told to frighten, but to remember, to keep the cadence of Ireland alive in a place where everything else had been replaced. The Scots brought their own customs too. They carved lanterns from turnips, placing a glowing ember inside to ward away mischievous spirits. When they found pumpkins in America larger, softer, easier to hollow, the symbol transformed. The carved face glowed brighter, the gesture spread faster, and soon the orange lantern replaced the small, rough turnip. It was still the same act, light shining against darkness, memory shining against time. Through the 19th century, Halloween remained an immigrant's ritual, quiet and local. But America was a place where customs mixed like rivers. The Irish and Scots found German neighbours who celebrated Allerheiligen and Allerseelen with their own grave candles and sweet breads. In these crowded neighborhoods, traditions merged. Bonfires were replaced with lantern parades. House-to-house visits, once done by masked villagers collecting food in Ireland, became children's games. The meaning shifted slowly from sacred to communal, from honoring the dead to gathering the living. Yet the essence was unchanged. It was still a night of connection. In rural towns, the celebration carried a sense of mystery. Young people played old fortune-telling games brought from the old country. They peeled apples in one long strip to see the initial of their future love. They dropped hazelnuts into fires to test the faithfulness of couples. These quiet acts of curiosity were echoes of the same rituals once performed under Celtic moons, now softened into playful superstition. The new world had given them new soil, but the roots remained old. By the late 1800s, newspapers began to describe Halloween as an evening of harmless mischief and merriment. It had become a folk holiday still tied to autumn, still wrapped in candlelight, but stripped of fear. Irish immigrants, once scorned for their customs, now saw their children's laughter reshape the memory of exile into belonging. The holiday that had survived conquest and famine was now being reborn as something uniquely American. And yet, beneath the laughter, the old meaning whispered. The lighting of a pumpkin still carried the quiet echo of prayer. The sharing of food still resembled an offering. The stories told by the fire still honored those who were gone. The immigrants may have found new names for their customs, but they had not forgotten why they existed. Halloween remained, as it always had been, the night between lands, between generations, between life and memory. In a sense, the Irish gave America more than a festival. They gave it a way to remember the dead without despair. They taught that even grief could glow like a candle. In the early American colonies, autumn carried the same solemn beauty. It always had golden fields, fading into silence, smoke curling from wooden chimneys, the hush of animals, sensing the approach of winter. The settlers, whether Puritans from England or immigrants from Ireland and Scotland, found the landscape both strange and familiar. The forests were darker, the rivers wider, the winds sharper, but the rhythm of the seasons was still the same. And when the leaves began to fall, something deep in memory stirred the call to gather, to give thanks, to tell stories while the fire burned low. These colonial autumns were not yet marked by the word Halloween. The name had not crossed fully into the new world, but the spirit of the season, the meeting of harvest and memory, was alive. The first celebrations of the new land were born from necessity rather than festivity. Harvest feasts were acts of survival, moments of relief that the earth had given enough to endure the cold. And yet, even in those practical gatherings, the old world lingered. The colonists prayed over food and flame, blending European gratitude with the awe of a landscape that seemed both young and ancient. As night came early, families gathered in houses lit by tallow candles. There were few luxuries, yet those evenings were rich with the sound of stories. They told of their homelands, of saints and soldiers, of the long voyage across the sea. But slowly, new tales began to take root, stories born from the wilderness around them. In the whisper of the wind through trees, settlers heard the echoes of spirits. The rustle of leaves became footsteps, the mist over rivers a ghostly veil. The new land was vast and unknown, and in that unknown, imagination found its stage. These colonial stories were not always dark. They were lessons in endurance. The people spoke of nature as both companion and test the forest as friend and mystery. Children listened wide-eyed as elders told of will-o'-the-wisps and wandering lights, echoes of the Celtic belief that the dead might still walk on certain nights. The same themes endured, the thinness between worlds, the presence of something unseen, and the belief that fire, even a small candle flame, could keep the darkness kind. Communities often gathered for husking bees or barn dances after the final harvest. These events were half labor, half celebration. Corn was husked, cider pressed, songs sung. In the corners of barns, women carved apples into shapes, predicting marriage or fortune, while men told stories meant to chill and amuse in equal measure. Every community had its storyteller, the one who could hold silence in his hands and make it tremble. Around him, the faces glowed orange in lamplight, and the smell of hay and smoke filled the air. The night was always a little longer than expected. As the fire dimmed, the talk turned from work to wonder. Someone would mention hearing voices near the river or seeing strange lights beyond the fields. The older folk would nod, half believing, half remembering the fires of Samhain and the prayers of All Souls. Without realizing it, they were recreating the oldest human ritual, the sharing of fear as comfort, the weaving of story into belonging. Even the strict Puritans, wary of superstition, could not completely banish the old rhythm. They called it the harvest thanksgiving, but they still felt the weight of the season, the sense that endings and beginnings were intertwined. In their hymns and sermons, they spoke of life as a fleeting season, of the need to prepare one's soul for eternity. It was not so far removed from the Celtic cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Different faith, same awareness. By the 18th century, as colonies grew into towns, the harvest gatherings became fixtures of the calendar. They were moments of rest and reflection before the long frost. Some regions added small customs borrowed from Europe, the carving of turnips, the lighting of lanterns along the road, the offering of apples to guests. These gestures carried no official name, yet each one echoed the old belief that to share light and food at the turning of the year was to honor the unseen threads that held the world together. When night fell and families walked home under cold stars, the silence between their footsteps and the distant sound of wind through trees carried something timeless. The boundary between work and worship, story and truth, felt porous. They might have called it harvest, or thanksgiving, or simply autumn, but in their hearts, they knew it was the same threshold their ancestors had stood upon, the passage from life into reflection, from light into rest. Centuries later, when Halloween would emerge in full color across America, it would inherit its warmth from these colonial nights. The bonfires of Samhain had become hearth fires. The offerings to spirits had become feasts of gratitude. By the 19th century, the old and new worlds had begun to merge in earnest. The immigrants who had crossed the ocean brought with them songs, prayers, and the memory of flickering fires from distant hills. The Americans who received them brought something else: space, abundance, and the restless imagination of a growing nation. Out of that meeting was born a new kind of October night, one that blended faith, folklore, and festivity into something both ancient and startlingly modern. Halloween, still unsteady in its new identity, began to take shape. For many immigrants, especially the Irish, the change came gradually. Their children spoke English with new accents, went to new schools, and learned the American calendar. But when the air turned crisp and the fields grew bare, something ancient stirred in them. They carved faces into pumpkins instead of turnips, placed candles in the windows, and told stories of spirits who still wandered when the veil thinned. Neighbors from Germany or England joined the celebrations, adding their own customs: lantern processions, songs for the dead, sweet cakes shaped like bones. Out of these fragments grew something recognizable, the first true American Halloweens. As towns grew and distances between communities shrank, traditions mingled even more. What had once been private, sacred rituals began to spill into the streets. Children played games in costume, disguising themselves as spirits or animals. The act of wearing a mask, ancient and instinctive, found new meaning in this strange land. It was no longer an act of protection from wandering souls, but a celebration of imagination itself. The mask allowed a child to be anyone: ghost, fairy, farmer, or saint. Beneath the laughter, however, lay the same truth that had guided Samhain for thousands of years. The boundary between worlds was thinner than we thought. The pumpkin became the new symbol of that boundary. Its golden glow stood for life surviving through darkness, a fragile light against the cold. To carve a face into it was to humanize the unknown, to make the mysterious approachable. The jack-o'-lantern's smile, half warm and half haunting, reflected our own uneasy comfort with mortality. The Irish legend of Stingy Jack, a trickster doomed to wander the earth with a lantern carved from a turnip, crossed the Atlantic and found new form. In America, the story met the abundance of pumpkins, and the small, grim tale of punishment turned into a broader celebration of cleverness, transformation, and light. As the century turned, Halloween began to appear in newspapers. Articles described it as a night of merriment, full of antics, games, and harmless mischief. What had once been a spiritual threshold became a communal event, a festival of play that united neighborhoods. Bonfires on hilltops were replaced with lamplight in windows, and processions through the dark turned into parades through the streets. In these changes, the meaning of the night softened, but it did not disappear. The same instinct to mark the passing of light, to honor what had been and what would be, lingered quietly in every candle's flame. Costumes, too, began to evolve. In Europe, disguises had been worn to blur the line between human and spirit, a gesture of respect, even humility. In America, they became expressions of creativity, humor, and theatricality. Children turned bedsheets into ghosts, corn husks into masks, and autumn leaves into crowns. Adults joined in, hosting masked balls where the music of violins mixed with the laughter of those who momentarily forgot their worries. What had once been a night of solemn mystery became a night of joyful release. Still, echoes of the sacred remained. Many households continued to light candles for the dead or place apples on the table in memory of absent loved ones. Some left their doors slightly open so the old ones can find their way. As one Irish grandmother in New York put it, the new world had changed the form, but not the heart. Memory and celebration had fused into one. By the early 1900s, Halloween had become one of the few truly shared rituals in America, a night without doctrine, where Catholic, Protestant, immigrant, and native-born could all take part. It was democratic in the truest sense, a common story told in many tongues. The ghosts and saints of Europe had found new homes in the laughter of children and the glow of jack-o'-lanterns lining wooden porches. The sacred and the playful coexisted without conflict. In the soft rhythm of these nights, something remarkable happened. A holiday that had once been about survival became about imagination. A night that had once honored death became a celebration of life. It was as though humanity, having carried the weight of centuries of fear and reverence, had decided to lighten it, to laugh gently at the dark, not out of disrespect, but out of understanding. By the early 20th century, Halloween had taken root across the American landscape like a transplanted tree that had found its perfect soil. It was no longer the quiet ritual of the Celts or the solemn vigil of the church, but a living hybrid, part remembrance, part celebration, and part playful mischief. In the small towns that dotted the countryside, the night of October 31st belonged to everyone. The air was filled with the scent of apples and smoke, and a sense of calm anticipation hung over streets lined with golden leaves. The first American Halloweens were intimate. They happened not in cities of noise and light, but in towns where people still knew one another's names. Preparations began days in advance. Pumpkins were gathered from fields, washed, and set on kitchen tables to be carved by candlelight. Children laughed as their parents traced faces on the orange skin, simple and uneven, more charm than fear. When dusk came, the pumpkins were placed on porches, their warm glow spreading across wooden fences and dirt roads. The effect was quiet and beautiful, a constellation of light scattered through the dark countryside. Inside, the families prepared food meant to last through the colder months: roasted corn, baked apples, cider simmering on the stove. The evening was both work and rest. Some houses hosted small gatherings, where neighbors shared pies and stories. Others preferred silence, sitting by the fire, watching shadows dance on the walls. But whether noisy or calm, every household felt part of something older, something that stretched beyond the edges of the town. As the night deepened, the children ventured out. Their costumes were simple sheets for ghosts, paper masks for animals, hats made of straw and ribbons. They carried small lanterns or bags made from old cloth. Going from house to house, they knocked politely, saying little phrases like, "A blessing for the harvest," or "Spare a treat for the souls." These were echoes of the old, souling traditions of Europe, though few understood their origins. What mattered was the sense of connection, the exchange of kindness between homes, the laughter that drifted down the streets. The adults, too, found comfort in the ritual. The older ones remembered the stories their parents had told back in Ireland or Scotland, tales of ancestors who returned home on this night, of the warmth that kept spirits from wandering cold. They may not have spoken those stories aloud anymore, but they still lit candles in the windows and left a small plate of food by the door. A piece of bread, a slice of apple, a cup of cider, gestures so small that they almost disappeared, but each carried centuries of meaning. In schoolhouses and church halls, community gatherings began to appear. There were games for the children, apple bobbing, fortune-telling with paper slips, guessing contests with jars of beans. The laughter that filled these rooms was a new kind of prayer, one of gratitude, of belonging, of release, for a people who had crossed oceans, who had seen famine and war. The simple act of watching their children play without fear was its own form of blessing. In the rural Midwest, farmers spoke of how the night always felt different, the wind softer, the animals quieter, the world briefly suspended. Some said it was superstition, others said it was memory, but everyone agreed that there was peace in it. When they looked at the line of lanterns along their fences, glowing softly against the cold, they saw not ghosts but continuity. The lights marked the border between harvest and rest, between one year and the next. By the 1920s, newspapers described Halloween as a festival of imagination, though in truth it was more a festival of remembering. The decorations, paper bats, cornstalks, and orange streamers were modern inventions, but the emotion they evoked was ancient. People did not celebrate monsters, they celebrated the turning of time. Beneath the laughter of masked children and the glow of pumpkins was a deeper stillness, the same stillness that had lived in Celtic hills and churchyard vigils. As small-town America embraced Halloween, the holiday began to change form once more. Costumes became more elaborate, parades began to appear, and civic groups organized events to keep the night safe. But for many, the heart of Halloween remained close to home: the flicker of a candle, the scent of burning leaves, the moment of stepping outside to feel the cool air and think of those who were gone. The holiday was evolving, yet somehow it was also returning to its source. because Halloween, at its core, was never about fright. It was about reflection. It was the one night when the living allowed themselves to imagine the unseen, to accept mystery not with fear but with gentleness. The people of small-town America may not have known the word Samhain, but they lived its spirit. The story of the pumpkin is, in many ways, the story of Halloween itself, a journey from shadow to light, from sacred ritual to gentle wonder. It began not with pumpkins, but with turnips. In the misty fields of ancient Ireland and Scotland, long before America even existed, people carved small lanterns out of turnips or beets on the night of Samhain. They scooped out the insides, placed a burning ember within, and set the glowing faces on windowsills or carried them through the darkness. These tiny flames were meant to guide friendly spirits home and ward away those who wandered with restless hearts. The faces were not meant to frighten. They were expressions of recognition and acknowledgement that the dead walked beside the living. The flickering lights were an invitation and a warning, all in one. As the night between worlds passed, the lanterns burned low, their smoke curling into the cold air like the breath of memory itself. When Irish and Scottish immigrants crossed the Atlantic centuries later, they brought this tradition with them. But in the New World, the land offered something the old one had not: the pumpkin. It grew in abundance across North America, glowing orange in the autumn fields, round and full and generous. To the immigrants, it was a revelation. It was easier to carve than the hard, knotty turnip, and it burned with a warmer, friendlier light. The transformation was almost immediate. The first recorded American jack-o'-lanterns appeared in the early 1800s. Newspapers described the practice with a mix of curiosity and amusement, calling it the quaint custom of the Irish. But soon, the glowing pumpkins began to appear everywhere, on porches, in fields, at the edge of roads. What had once been a symbol of fear and reverence became a universal sign of welcome. The legend behind the lantern, however, remained unchanged. In Irish folklore, there was a man named Jack, a trickster, clever and stubborn, who once fooled the devil himself. But his cleverness came at a cost. When he died, heaven rejected him for his mischief, and hell refused him for his deceit. Condemned to wander the earth forever, Jack carried a single ember in a hollowed turnip to light his endless road. The people called him Jack of the Lantern, and his lonely light became a warning and a comfort all at once. In America, the story softened. Jack was no longer a figure of terror, but of irony and charm, a ghost not of punishment, but of persistence. The pumpkin lantern became his smile, wide and patient, glowing gently through the night. Children carved faces with crooked teeth and kind eyes, giving Jack countless new identities. Each lantern flickered with a different personality: mischievous, kind, wise, weary. In that transformation, the story of a cursed soul became a symbol of endurance, humor, and human warmth. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the pumpkin took on even greater meaning. It became the centerpiece of autumn, a sign of harvest, of comfort, of the slow descent into winter. Farmers sold them by the cartload at markets. Town squares displayed them in piles as bright as sunset. Schoolhouses held contests for the best carved lantern, and children competed with pride rather than fear. The pumpkin had become the heart of Halloween, its gentle light replacing the wildfires of the old world. Yet within that transformation, something ancient persisted. To carve a pumpkin was still to participate in the oldest of human acts, shaping darkness into meaning. Every cut of the knife was a gesture of control over the unknown. Every candle lit inside a hollowed shell was an act of faith that light, no matter how fragile, could survive the night. The faces that stared back from porches were not grotesque monsters, but reminders that the boundary between the living and the dead had always been bridged by kindness. In time, the pumpkin spread beyond Halloween. It became a symbol of the entire season of gratitude, of abundance, of warmth in the face of the cold. It appeared in paintings, poems, and recipes, woven into the identity of autumn itself. The humble vegetable that once flickered on lonely Irish hillsides had become an emblem of comfort for millions. But if you look closely at a carved pumpkin on a quiet night, the candle flickering inside, the air cool with the scent of smoke and earth, you can still see its origin. You can feel the echo of those ancient turnip lanterns, glowing faintly on stone windowsills, guiding the spirits home. The flame inside is the same flame that once burned on Celtic hills, the same that lit the fires of Samhain, the same that became candles in the church and hearths in the New World. The vessel has changed, the light has not. In the end, the pumpkin's journey is our own, a story of transformation, survival, and meaning remade through time. It reminds us that tradition never dies. It simply finds new forms. Before trick or treat became the cheerful chant of children, it was a quiet ritual of charity and remembrance. Its roots reach back through centuries of European custom to the smoky cottages of medieval England, to the mist-covered roads of Ireland and Scotland, to a time when knocking on a stranger's door carried both reverence and risk. What now seems like a game once held sacred meaning, an exchange of kindness between the living and the dead. In medieval Europe, the night of All Hallows' Eve was followed by All Souls' Day, a time to pray for the departed. Families baked small cakes called soul cakes sweet, round pastries marked with a simple cross. These cakes were given to the poor, to travelers, and especially to children who went from door to door offering prayers for the souls of the household's loved ones. Each cake received meant one more prayer spoken, one more light carried into eternity. To give and to receive were both acts of grace. This practice was called souling. The soulers often dressed in simple disguises, shawls, veils, or masks. They sang songs of blessing, some mournful, some hopeful. The oldest verses that survive sound hauntingly familiar in tone, though their language has changed through time. A soul for a soul cake, pray you, good mistress. A soul cake. The words carried both plea and promise. The poor gained food, the rich gained intercession, and the entire community gained continuity. Death was not hidden from life, it was part of its rhythm. In Scotland and Ireland, the tradition blended with older Celtic customs of guising dressing in costume to walk safely among spirits on the night when worlds touched. Children, covered in soot or wrapped in old clothes, would visit neighbors and perform short verses or jokes in exchange for food or coins. It was less solemn, more playful, yet still tinged with the same awareness of mystery. The disguises were not meant to scare, but to equalize for one night. All souls, rich or poor, human or spirit, shared the same disguise. When these customs crossed the Atlantic with immigrants in the 19th century, they slowly began to fuse. The American Halloween inherited both the charity of souling and the theatricality of guising. But in the New World, where social hierarchies were softer and abundance greater, the practice took on a lighter tone. Instead of prayers for the dead, children offered laughter. Instead of solemn verses, they performed songs, jokes, or small tricks. The spiritual exchange became social, a ritual of generosity and community. By the early 1900s, newspapers across the United States began to describe a new kind of Halloween tradition. Children wandered through neighborhoods in costume, calling out greetings and receiving sweets. Some played pranks on those who refused them, harmless mischief like moving gates or writing with soap on windows. The balance between charity and chaos became the essence of the night. Trick or treat. The phrase that would come later captured that delicate dance, the offer of peace wrapped in a hint of playful threat. The phrase itself is believed to have originated in the American Midwest during the 1920s and spread rapidly through the following decades. Communities that had once frowned upon Halloween's rowdiness began to see the value of its ritual. Town leaders encouraged families to participate by preparing treats, turning mischief into fellowship. What had been a chaotic night became a shared celebration, where neighbors met under candlelight and laughter replaced fear. Yet beneath the playfulness, the same old current flowed. To open one's door to a stranger, even a small masked child, remained an act of hospitality with ancient resonance. It was, in its own way, a renewal of the bond that had once tied villages together across the Celtic lands. The giver offered safety, warmth, and sweetness. The receiver carried gratitude and light. Both participated in the oldest human exchange, kindness against the cold. There were places, especially in rural towns, where the meaning of the ritual deepened further. Families who had lost loved ones that year left small treats on their doorsteps, not only for children but for the spirits they still felt close by. Apples, nuts, or bread, humble offerings whispered into the dark. The world had changed, but the gesture was timeless. It said, "You are remembered, you are welcome." By mid-century, Halloween had become a national event, cheerful, creative, and commercial. Candy companies turned souling into sweetness, costumes became colorful, and neighborhoods glittered with porch lights. But even then, the ritual kept a trace of its sacred heart. Each knock on a door echoed the ancient prayer of connection. Each shared smile was an offering to the invisible ties that hold a community together. To wear a mask is to borrow another face. It is one of humanity's oldest instincts, a gesture that belongs to both ritual and play, to worship and rebellion. Across time and culture, the mask has held power. It has hidden and revealed, protected and transformed. On the night we now call Halloween, that power returns each year in quiet, familiar ways. Children pull on costumes, adults smile behind painted faces, and for one evening, the boundaries of identity soften. Beneath the surface of fun lies something far older, the ancient freedom of becoming something other than oneself. In the distant past, masks were sacred objects. During Samhain, when the Celts believed the veil between worlds grew thin, people covered their faces with soot or animal hides. They did this not to deceive, but to harmonize with the unseen. The disguise made them unrecognizable to wandering spirits, or, in some tales, allowed the spirits to recognize them as kin. It was both shield and invitation. To wear the mask was to say, "I understand the mystery, and I respect it." Later, in medieval Europe, the custom evolved into mumming small troops of performers who dressed in disguise and went door to door singing songs or performing plays. Their masks, often crude or whimsical, allowed them to speak truths and jokes that might otherwise be forbidden. For one night, social hierarchies disappeared. A peasant could mimic a nobleman, a widow could become a queen, a monk could dance with a wooden demon and suffer no punishment. Behind the mask, the human voice was free. When these old customs crossed the Atlantic, they adapted to a new landscape. In early America, masks appeared at harvest gatherings and winter balls, at barn dances and parades. They carried the same quiet liberation, the joy of anonymity, the relief of shedding daily identity. For communities that worked hard and lived within strict moral boundaries, the mask offered a rare permission to laugh, to play, to exist outside the expected. Halloween became the night when ordinary people could experiment with extraordinary selves. The power of disguise worked on more than one level. Psychologically, it released tension. A child who feared the dark could become the ghost that haunted it. A shy adult could wear a mask and suddenly speak with confidence. The costume did not conceal the true self. It revealed hidden layers. Behind cloth or paint, people rediscovered courage, humor, even tenderness. Sociologists later observed that Halloween, in its quiet way, mirrored the older European Feast of Fools, a ritual of reversal. For one night, the serious could be silly, the powerful could be mocked, the quiet could be seen. The festival reminded people that life required both order and chaos, both rule and release. Without the occasional inversion, societies grew brittle. Without laughter, faith became fear. The mask kept the balance intact. In towns across America during the early 20th century, costume parties became the centerpiece of Halloween. Families sewed outfits from curtains, paper, or straw. Some chose ghosts or skeletons, others animals or clowns. The most creative designs combined both light and dark angels with cracked wings, scarecrows with smiling faces. These images may have seemed simple, but they carried ancient meaning: transformation, renewal, the acceptance that identity itself is fluid. Even the children understood this intuitively. Behind a mask, they could knock on a stranger's door without shyness, their voices bold and cheerful. The anonymity of costume turned fear into confidence, difference into play. And when neighbors opened their doors, they saw not threat but delight, a living metaphor for how mystery, when met with kindness, becomes beauty. As Halloween grew into a public celebration, the mask became its most democratic symbol. It asked for no belief, no doctrine. Anyone could wear it, the rich and the poor, the old and the young. It leveled society in the gentlest possible way, not by erasing identity but by multiplying it. For a few hours, the world agreed to suspend its seriousness. The act of pretending became a ritual of empathy. If I can wear your face, perhaps I can understand your soul. Even now, when costumes are sold in stores and masks are made of plastic rather than soot or wood, the old energy persists. Every Halloween night, across countless towns and cities, people still feel the quiet magic of transformation. For a few hours, fear dissolves into laughter. The mask allows us to face the unknown not as victims of fate, but as its partners. And when midnight comes and the masks are set aside, something subtle remains. People feel lighter, softer, closer to one another. The ritual has done its work. It has reminded us that the self is not a cage, but a costume, one we can adjust, exchange, or remake. Rituals are the language of the soul. They are how humanity remembers without words, how it transforms the invisible into something that can be touched, tasted, or seen. Long before we had science to explain our fears or psychology to name our needs, we had rituals, the small and patient gestures that reminded us we belonged to something larger: lighting a candle, sharing a meal, placing a mask upon the face. Every generation changes the surface of these acts, but their heartbeat remains the same. They tell us that life has meaning, even when we cannot explain it. Halloween, stripped of its costumes and candy, is one of those few rituals that has survived every cultural transformation. Its heart is older than language. It speaks in symbols: the fading light of autumn, the circle of fire, the harvest gathered and shared, the remembrance of those who are gone. It is a night of pretending, yes, but that pretending is not falsehood, it is exploration. When we pretend, we open a doorway into empathy. We try on other shapes, other lives, and in doing so, we rediscover our own. Psychologists have long understood what ancient people intuited. The human mind does not separate play from healing, nor imagination from wisdom. Ritual pretending allows us to face fear in safe ways. It gives form to uncertainty. When a child dresses as a ghost, they learn that what is frightening can be approached and understood. When an adult lights a candle in the dark, they acknowledge loss without letting it swallow them. Rituals are the bridges we build over chaos. Even the simplest gestures carry hidden intelligence. To share food is to remind ourselves that survival depends on generosity. To wear a costume is to remember that identity is fluid, not fixed. To tell a story in the dark is to convert fear into wonder. Each act may seem small, but together they form the architecture of human endurance. They are how civilizations and individuals keep balance when the world turns cold. Modern life often pretends to have outgrown ritual. We imagine that technology, progress, and reason have replaced the need for symbolic acts. Yet each year, as October approaches, we find ourselves returning to them. We carve faces into pumpkins, gather with friends, decorate our homes with the imagery of death and memory, and feel a quiet sense of peace in doing so. Something in us still hungers for the rhythm, the repetition, the reassurance that comes from shared gestures. Rituals are the pulse beneath our distractions. Halloween is unique among them because it unites opposites. It is both playful and profound, both personal and collective. It allows laughter to exist beside reverence, life to stand beside death. That duality is what gives it power. It is the one night in the modern year when we collectively admit that the unknown exists, and instead of fearing it, we invite it in. We hang lanterns at the threshold and say, "You are welcome here." Sociologists have noted that, in an increasingly fragmented world, holidays like Halloween act as gentle anchors. They offer belonging without demand. You do not need to believe in spirits or saints to participate. All you need to do is light a candle, offer kindness, or share in the simple joy of the evening. These shared actions reconnect communities that might otherwise drift apart. A bowl of candy on a porch is not just a treat, it is an act of trust, a signal that the door between neighbors is open. At a deeper level, the ritual of pretending reconnects us to our inner world. Masks and costumes, playful though they seem, allow the subconscious to breathe. The hero, the trickster, the ghost, the wanderer, all these archetypes live within us. On Halloween night, we give them space to speak. We allow the imagination to step outside for air. The relief we feel afterward, that soft, unspoken happiness, is the mind returning home, freshly reminded that it has many rooms. We may not gather around bonfires on hilltops anymore, but we still gather around the same flame, the human need to mark the passage of time and to find beauty in endings. Every ritual, from the first Samhain fire to the last candle in a jack-o'-lantern, carries the same message. Life moves in circles, and every circle holds memory. The act of pretending is not escapism. It is how we practice remembrance. When the last trick-or-treaters return home and the streets fall silent, what lingers is not just sugar or smoke. It is a sense of continuity, the knowledge that, for one night, the world slowed down enough for us to feel the rhythm beneath it. Rituals remind us that there is still space in the modern heart for mystery. They whisper that we are not only flesh and thought, but story and pattern and flame, and perhaps that is why we still need them. In pretending, we remember who we are. In remembering, we find peace. There is a reason why autumn feels like remembering. Every year, when the air cools and the trees begin to shed their leaves, something inside us slows down too. We feel it before we understand it, a quiet invitation to pause. The world, once loud with color and growth, softens into gold and grey. The days shorten, the light turns low and amber, and the earth itself seems to breathe out. It is not death we feel in autumn, but the rhythm of returning. In ancient times, the Celts watched this cycle with reverence. To them, the dying of the year was not a tragedy but a transformation. The falling leaves were not decay, but offering. The fire that burned on Samhain was not to chase death away, but to honor its part in the balance of life. Every ending was also a seed. Every silence contained the memory of song. They believed that time did not move in a straight line, but in circles, and each circle brought both loss and renewal. That belief has never truly left us. Modern people may not speak of the veil between worlds, but we still feel it when we stand beneath the bare branches and see the last light fading. We still know, instinctively, that endings are not absolute. The same leaf that falls into soil will return as part of the tree next spring. The same warmth that fades from the sky will glow again in candles and hearths. The loop continues quietly, with or without our attention. Halloween sits precisely on that threshold, a night suspended between seasons, between memory and hope. It is the moment when we recognize that to live is to move through endless cycles of beginning and ending, losing and finding, forgetting and remembering. It asks us not to resist the passage of time, but to walk alongside it, to honor the pattern rather than fight it. In that acceptance lies a strange kind of peace. When we light a candle inside a pumpkin, we are participating in that same ancient rhythm. We take something that has grown and hollow it out, creating space for light. It is a small ritual of transformation. The fruit of summer becomes the lantern of autumn. The living world gives way to memory, and the memory glows softly in the dark. We may not think of it in those terms, but every flicker of flame carries the echo of an older wisdom that the only way to endure is to let go gracefully. Humanity has always feared endings, yet every culture has also tried to make peace with them. The Egyptians built tombs that pointed toward eternity. The Romans held festivals for the shades of their ancestors. The Japanese write names of the dead on floating lanterns and send them downstream. The Celts lit bonfires under stars and believed their ancestors stood on the other side of the flames, watching. Each act, though different, carried the same understanding, that time loops, and nothing truly disappears. It only changes form. Perhaps this is why autumn comforts even as it saddens. It teaches us to see beauty in decline. The dying leaves are not wasted. They color the world one last time before becoming nourishment for what will come. The season whispers that loss is not the opposite of life, it is part of its design. And in that whisper we find humility. We realize that our own stories, too, are woven into that same cycle. We will fall, rest, and rise again in ways we cannot yet imagine. There is also a psychological truth buried in this rhythm. People need visible symbols of change to process what cannot be spoken. When the world itself shifts around us, when trees release their leaves and the light fades earlier each day, we feel less alone in our transitions. The outer landscape mirrors the inner one. Autumn tells us that to shed is not to fail, but to prepare, that surrender can be a form of wisdom. Halloween, then, is not only a celebration of the strange or the supernatural, it is a meditation on impermanence. It invites us to laugh at fear, to decorate death, to turn the unsettling into the familiar. It gives us one night to hold hands with endings and see them not as loss, but as passage. And when the night is over, we wake to November, colder, emptier, but clearer too. The world feels new again precisely because it has allowed itself to rest. Time moves in a quiet loop, and we move with it. The same fires that once burned on Celtic hills now flicker in our windows. The same desire to understand the dark still hums beneath our laughter. Every autumn, When we rake the leaves and feel that strange ache in our chest, we are not mourning. We are remembering what it means to be part of the circle, to live, to fade, to return. And in that realization lies the calm at the heart of Halloween, that life's beauty is inseparable from its impermanence, and every ending, however small, carries within it the seed of another beginning. Every culture, in every age, has looked backward to understand itself. We are creatures of memory, and the past is not something we leave behind, it walks beside us. On the night that divides the living from the dead, the old world from the new, that truth becomes clearer than ever. Halloween may wear modern clothes now, costumes, candy, laughter, but its heart beats with something older, the quiet conversation between generations, spoken not in words but in rituals of light. The Celts who first marked Samhain did not fear their ancestors, they welcomed them. To them, death was a continuation, not a curtain. The dead were still part of the household, only living elsewhere. Fires were lit to guide them home, and empty seats were left at the table so they might join unseen. Every offering of bread, milk, or flame carried the same message: you are remembered, you are still one of us. In that remembrance lay strength. To forget the dead was to lose part of the living. That idea survived through centuries of transformation. When Christianity spread across Europe, the ancient rituals did not vanish, they blended into new forms. All Hallows' Eve, All Saints' Day, and All Souls' Day each carried traces of Samhain's reverence. The church changed the names, but not the longing. Bells were rung for the departed, candles burned in windows, prayers whispered into the cold. The holy and the human met in the act of remembrance. Even now, though most who celebrate Halloween do not think of saints or spirits, the impulse is the same. Every flicker of a jack-o'-lantern, every story told by firelight, every moment of reflection on a life once lived, these are modern echoes of the same ancient music. They say what words cannot. You mattered. You still matter. The form has changed, but the purpose endures. Memory demands expression, and Halloween gives it shape. There is a reason we remember through celebration rather than silence. Grief, left unspoken, hardens into fear, but when we bring it into the light through laughter, through ritual, through beauty, it becomes connection. The Celts knew this instinctively. So did the Romans during their festival of Lemuria, when families offered beans to appease restless spirits. So do the people of Mexico during the Day of the Dead, where graves become gardens of flowers and music. The act of honoring the departed is never about death itself. It is about keeping love alive across the distance of time. The same instinct touches even the smallest Halloween traditions. When a family places pumpkins on the porch, they are not merely decorating, they are marking a threshold, the place where home meets the unknown. The glowing faces, friendly or strange, are signals. We remember, we keep watch. When children wander from house to house, they retrace the steps of countless generations who sought light in the dark, hospitality in uncertainty. The past walks with them, gently disguised as fun. In a deeper sense, this night teaches us something rare in modern life, how to face the inevitable without despair. The ancestors we remember were not perfect, yet their stories made us. They survived hunger, winter, and loss. Their hands built what we now hold. When we celebrate Halloween, we are not only playing dress-up, we are, for one evening, stepping into that lineage. We wear masks, but behind them, we carry faces that echo centuries of endurance. For many cultures, remembering the dead was also a way of protecting the living. The ancestors were seen as guides, watching from beyond the veil. Forgetting them was not only impolite, it was dangerous. To neglect their memory was to lose wisdom. The Celts, the Greeks, the Chinese all believed that the past had eyes, and those eyes guarded the future. Lighting a candle or offering food was not superstition. It was gratitude, a small payment for the invisible labor of love that had come before. There is also a quiet psychological wisdom in this. To honor the dead is to admit our own impermanence without fear. It softens the boundaries between what is gone and what remains. When we remember, we make peace with loss. We transform absence into presence. The dead live on not through monuments, but through attention, through the stories we tell, the names we whisper, the moments we choose to pause and feel their nearness. In this way, Halloween, for all its costumes and candy, is one of the most profound acts of collective empathy humanity still performs. It is not about pretending ghosts exist. It is about remembering that we do. We are the continuation of countless lives, and the warmth we feel by candlelight is not only ours, it is borrowed from everyone who came before. So when the lanterns glow and the laughter drifts through the cool night air, there is more happening than play. The ancestors are listening, and the living are answering. Across centuries and cultures, the message is the same. We remember you. If someone from 2,000 years ago could walk our streets on Halloween night, they would recognize more than we might expect. The faces would be different, the lights brighter, the sounds louder, yet beneath the noise and color, the pulse would feel familiar. The fires have become candles in pumpkins. The offerings have turned into candy. The songs of remembrance have become laughter in the dark. The forms have changed, but the essence has not. Humanity still gathers at the turning of the year, still honors the balance between life and death, still feels the need to connect what has been with what will be. The modern world likes to believe it has outgrown ritual. We build machines, write algorithms, and measure time with precision, yet each autumn we return almost unconsciously to gestures older than history. We decorate our homes with symbols of death and harvest. We light our windows with warm orange light. We gather in groups to share stories and sweets. The logic of the digital age pauses for a moment to let something older speak. The language of the seasons, the instinct to gather, the need to remember. There is something profoundly grounding about this return. In a society that moves faster each year, Halloween slows us down, not in pace, but in awareness. It asks us to notice the world again, the smell of smoke in the air, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the way light looks when it fades earlier each day. These sensations, simple and ancient, pull us back into the physical world, into the rhythm that sustained our ancestors. It is a kind of collective, remembering a brief reunion between the human being and the natural cycle that shaped it. Even the smallest modern symbols carry echoes of older meaning. The pumpkin lantern, now cheerful and domestic, once stood guard between the worlds. The mask, once used to confuse spirits, now expresses imagination. The sharing of food, once a sacred offering, has become candy passed between strangers, but the emotional truth remains untouched. The human heart still wants to give, still wants to connect, still wants to believe that kindness can cross any distance, even the one between life and death. You can see this ancient memory even in the most commercial corners of Halloween. Children, dressed as witches, skeletons, or heroes, knock on doors without fear. Adults open those doors and offer sweetness, trust, and warmth. In a world often divided, this simple ritual unites entire neighborhoods for one evening. It reminds us that generosity is not lost, only hidden beneath layers of busyness. A bowl of candy becomes a symbol of community, a small modern altar to human connection. The same can be said of the way we tell stories on this night. Movies, books, and tales of ghosts and mystery, they are not just entertainment. They are the descendants of the old fireside stories, the oral traditions that once explained the unexplainable. When we watch or listen to these stories, we are not merely seeking fear, we are reaching for that same shared thrill that our ancestors felt when the storyteller paused and everyone leaned closer to the flame. We want to feel alive in the presence of mystery. There is also a deeper continuity in how we use this season to make peace with uncertainty. The ancients faced the dark with torches. We face it with electric lights. But the fear is the same, the fear of the unknown, of time's passage, of endings. Halloween offers a playful rehearsal for that fear. We decorate it, name it, laugh at it, and in doing so, we rob it of its power. A skeleton made of paper, a ghost costume cut from a sheet, these are ways of saying, we see you and we are not afraid. In many ways, the old world never disappeared, it simply moved inside us. The symbols, stories, and instincts that once shaped Samhain, Lemuria, or the Feast of the Dead are now woven into our subconscious, resurfacing every autumn. They whisper in the rustle of dry leaves, in the soft glow of streetlights, in the hush that falls when the trick-or-treaters go home and the night becomes still again. The ancient and the modern coexist quietly, like overlapping worlds, one seen, one felt. And perhaps that is what makes Halloween timeless. It does not belong to any one religion, country, or age. It belongs to the shared human rhythm of remembering and renewing. Every culture adds its own layer, a different face to the same flame, but the purpose remains constant: to honor the passage of life, to face the dark with grace, and to keep the light burning just a little longer. When we look at our glowing porches, our playful costumes, our laughter echoing through the night, we are not merely celebrating a holiday. We are continuing a lineage of meaning, one that began with the first human who feared the dark and ended that fear by lighting a fire. The world may have changed beyond recognition, but the spark has never gone out. Every culture has spoken of it: the threshold, the border, the veil, a place not entirely of life and not entirely of death. The Celts imagined it as mist rolling across the fields on Samhain night. The Greeks pictured it as the river Styx flowing between the realms. In Japan, it was the thin curtain of smoke rising from incense. In Mexico, the path of marigolds guiding souls home. Each name, each image, pointed toward the same truth, that we sense something between what we can see and what we cannot, a place that is not myth, but intuition. The modern world does not talk much about veils. We prefer clear lines: what is real and what is not, what exists and what does not. Yet the idea refuses to die. It lingers quietly, surfacing in language, art, and feeling. When we say that a place feels haunted, or that time seems to stop, or that we can almost sense someone we love though they are gone, we are speaking the old language again. The veil never left. We just gave it new names: nostalgia, memory, emotion. Halloween stands at the heart of that old idea. It is the one night each year when we acknowledge the thinness of the world, that fragile line between presence and absence. We sense it in the silence after laughter fades, in the flicker of a candle's flame, in the way shadows stretch longer than they should. We do not need to believe in ghosts to feel it. The veil is not about spirits outside us. It is about the quiet mystery within us. The Celts believed that on Samhain the dead could walk among the living, and the living could glimpse the other side. This belief was not born of superstition, but of deep empathy. They understood that loss does not erase connection, that love, once created, does not simply end. The veil was their way of naming that truth. It was a symbol of continuity, not fear. To them, the dead were not gone. They were near, visible only through a softer kind of sight. Modern psychology echoes that wisdom in another language. Memory, scientists say, is not static, it is alive, reshaped each time we recall it. The people we've lost still live in those changing memories, their presence real in the emotional patterns they left behind. When we light candles on Halloween, when we tell their stories, when we whisper their names, we are not imagining them back into being, we are acknowledging that they never fully left. The veil, then, is not a wall between worlds. It is the space where memory and love overlap. Even our fascination with ghosts, strange as it may seem, carries tenderness. Ghosts are metaphors for what endures the fragments of emotion that refuse to fade. Every haunted tale is secretly about longing, about the impossibility of final goodbyes. The haunted house, the wandering figure, the voice in the wind, they are all echoes of the same human refusal to accept that connection can vanish. When we decorate our homes with ghosts each October, we are not celebrating fear, we are acknowledging that the unseen is part of us. The veil also has a second meaning, one that speaks not of the dead, but of the living. It represents the boundaries we carry within ourselves, the line between who we are and who we might become, between our public face and our hidden truth. Rituals like Halloween give us permission to step through those internal veils, to explore the parts of ourselves that daily life hides. When we wear masks, tell stories, or light candles in the dark, we are also walking through our own shadows. This is why the night between worlds still resonates, even in an age of screens and satellites. It answers something emotional that technology cannot touch, the longing to feel connected to both the living and the dead, to the past and the future, to what is seen and what is sensed. It reminds us that existence is layered, that we move through multiple realities each day: memory, imagination, and the physical world. The veil is not a superstition. It is a symbol for everything about life that refuses to be simplified. When we step outside on Halloween night and feel that peculiar stillness in the air, we are touching that in between. The laughter of children echoes down the street, and yet behind it, there is another sound, the quiet hum of something older. The world feels suspended, as if holding its breath. It is not eerie, it is peaceful. It feels like the universe itself remembering. Perhaps that is why the idea of the veil endures. We need it not as an explanation, but as a reminder that reality is richer than what we can measure, and that love, memory, and imagination blur every boundary we try to draw. The veil is not to be feared or torn away. It is to be honored, like silk stretched between two lights, glowing softly with what lies beyond. And so, every October, we lift our candles and gaze into that thin space, not to summon ghosts, but to see ourselves more clearly. As the last candle fades and the night settles into silence, we remember what Halloween truly means. It is not a night of fear, nor a festival of the dead. It is a mirror showing us the rhythm that has always guided life itself. Every flame we light, every mask we wear, every story we tell beneath the dim October sky, all of it is an act of remembrance. The ancients lit their fires to honor what they could not see. We do the same, though our fires are smaller now, glowing in windows, reflected in our eyes. We are still the same people, standing at the same threshold, trying to make peace with the passing of time. The lesson of the night between worlds is quiet but enduring. Nothing is ever truly lost. The past still walks beside us. The future still waits patiently, and within every ending, there is the spark of beginning. So when the wind rises and the lanterns flicker, do not hurry to shut the door. Let the warmth linger a little longer. The light you see is not only flame, it is memory. It is life remembering itself.